Welcome to the Instructor Podcast Green Room Edition. This is a show where we cover all the latest news and hot topics from within the driving instructor world. As always, I am your mediocre host, Terry Cook, and I'm delighted to be here, but even more delighted that you have chose to listen. And you will be delighted it's not just me. I am joined by the man, the myth, and indeed the legend, Chris Bensted. How are we doing, Chris?
All is good. Yes, the world is a good place.
Excellent. I'm also joined by a couple of my lovely premium members who have come along to watch the show being recorded live and potentially insult me in the chat, as has happened already, and we've been recording for literally 2 minutes, or contribute in a more sensible and wise fashion as we go along. But we are here today to talk about the news. There hasn't been a massive amount, I don't think, but there's been some interesting news. We're going to start with the news that was released today, as of recording, which I believe is the 25th, which is that the DVSA have announced that they are limiting the number of times that ADIs can swap driving tests online. Now, they're doing this because they believe that bots are swapping tests online frequently, and they think it's a good way to catch out the bots, because on a recent survey, they asked about the number of times on average you swap tests, and the average number was 5. So I think they believe in people going significantly above that are a bot. So that will be limited. The number of times you can swap tests online will be limited. However, if you exceed that number, then you can still swap tests, but you have to ring up and do it over the phone, which is an aspect I quite like. And the other thing to mention is they are not telling you the number of times you are allowed to swap. The idea being that if they tell you, there'll be a way to bypass the system, or, I don't know, some fancy word that I can't think of right now. So, Chris, I mentioned this to you before the show, and you had an interesting response, so take it away.
Does it mean there's going to be tests available for us to swap with? Because that'd be novel. Don't know about your way, but we're looking at 6 months on average. So yeah, I think I was less annoyed when you informed me, because I hadn't seen it, that you could phone up still. So yeah, I think the thing is they've taken it from the survey, and the survey was done when there weren't any tests available. Nothing's really changed. When tests become available, we're going to want to swap. We're going to want to move them around. So it feels a little bit like people are going to end up saying, "Oh well, you might as well give it a go because I can't be bothered to phone up and swap it." And there's an ADI raised with me this week. There's a GDPR issue. If you've got two pupils that want to swap tests, you can't just hand out pupil details and all of the qualifying data that the DVSA want to a pupil for them to do it. You've got to do it yourself, or have someone in the company or something from a GDPR perspective. Yeah, it probably is a good thing, and we don't know the technical details. But I don't know. It probably looks like they're doing something rather than actually doing something, because there's no tests to swap. It's a bit like telling people that you're selling the best product in the world for £2.99, so they turn up at your shop and you go, "But I haven't got any in stock." Yeah.
I think we've spoke a lot about the DVSA can't do much. Their hands are tied with a lot of things. And I think that's why I kind of like this a little bit. And this is something they can do. It's not a grand change. It's not going to suddenly free up 10,000 tests or anything like that. It's not a groundbreaking thing, but it's one of the few things that they can do that they've clearly had an idea and gone, "Ooh, why don't we do this?" And I'm like, yeah, okay, do it. It's not going to cause us a massive problem. It's not going to cause me a problem because I don't do tests for my students, so it don't make a difference to me. But it's not going to, I would imagine the people that do tests, it's not going to cause a massive problem in most cases. And if it does help filter out a couple of the people that are charging £500 a test and then sitting at home on the computer, swapping them all day long, and that's how they earn a living, then I suppose that can be a good thing. I will just mention Gary Thomas. I said in the comments, there's no tests at all for the remainder of 2024 at my test centre. We're not too bad where we are. I think I can, my students seem able to book one, sort of 5 or 6 months. They don't seem to have a massive amount of trouble. We can't get them regularly at short notice. But what I am finding is that, using the apps, they can generally move it forward. So I think I've said this before, but it seems like, or around my area, it doesn't necessarily feel like the queue, if you like, and we don't know how long that queue is, as you've pointed out several times, but the queue isn't necessarily getting smaller, but there's more spaces in it.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. You what you just said has made me think about the fact that, well, firstly, you don't like the bots, but you want your pupils to use them to get a cancellation. Love you, Terry.
Yep.
But also, is this move going to put off instructors managing their pupils' tests and such? Is that then going to make the world, a worse place? So we end up with that situation of people saying, "Well, I can't get a test," and then instructors potentially taking them when they're not as ready as they want them to be. But I would go the other way and make it so that only ADIs can book tests. It wouldn't be popular with ADIs because we've got a job to do and everything else. But actually, you could start charging for the process. I wonder whether that makes things better, because if there's limited availability, I'm thinking about other places that would have the same. If there's limited availability, you potentially look after a smaller market first, which in turning the commercial world would mean that the price went up. But you kind of accept that because actually you can manage that demand. The demand won't change, but if they're engaging with us instead of engaging with the pupils, that takes pressure off the DVSA to actually do something about it. And I'm just wondering if it's going in the wrong direction to get an actual solution, and God forbid it just looks good on paper, so they can be seen to be doing something.
I remember Michael Schumacher. I used to love Formula One. I don't anymore. It's boring. But I used to love Formula One, and I loved Michael Schumacher. And he was the biggest campaigner for. If anyone is listening to the audio on this, then I suggest you go and check out the video, because I'm going to put the actual video up on YouTube for this one, because Chris has so far done the Rubik's Cube at least one time while we're talking. So I'm not sure if that means he's paying more or less attention, but either way, I used to love Michael Schumacher, and he was the biggest campaigner for safety improvements within Formula One. But he would also say that whilst he can do these things, he will do them, but he wants them changing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've kind of got the same feeling towards tests, because if you asked me, I would say yes. Driving instructors should either be responsible for booking tests for the students or should have to countersign that booking process. So the student could book it, but they have to use your number, and then you get a notification saying, do you accept this test? So whichever way you did it, I'm a big advocate of that, but I don't do it because I don't want the aggro. But if it was forced upon me, I would do it. And I do think that would be a better way around, because it would put another step in there before, are you ready? Because then we have a say in, are you ready? Rather than just pupil going, I think I'll be ready. I think that could be a part of it. But again, is that a change the DVSA can enforce, or is that a change that has to be put through government channels?
Sorry, that was a question.
Yes, it was a question. It wasn't. I didn't do the through government channels at the end.
It caught me off guard. I think something needs to be done through government channels, doesn't it? That's it at the end of the day. At the moment, nothing seems to be. And as we know, if you write to complain about that, you get a DVSA response. The response that's been sent to people who have written and complained about it through their MP is that you need to write to the transport secretary about it, but they'll only pass it on to the DVS. So we seem in a loop. We seem stuck in this loop where we can't do anything now I'm waiting to hear something more definitive from NASP, but I don't think they're in a better position than anyone else to actually get a response. It seems like we're just kind of waiting for it to fix itself, and they're moving the pieces around that they've got, but we need we need to either cull something or someone or something, or we need to we need a change of some kind in there, because we can't work with what we've got. And I don't know whether this is the right thing to focus on. It's definitely a change that could be made. I think there's lots of those. But a change, yeah, at some kind of legislative level, is this just the beginning of the end for the DVSA, and that privatization is going to happen, and then private companies will sort out the big mess that's been caused by the government, by COVID, or is it that there'll be some other big change, like a change to licensing, and if we're looking at GDL, graduated licensing of some kind, then that seems to make things worse rather than better. So I don't see how we can be doing both. I don't know which one comes first, but they just seem to, there's an increased appetite, but that sounds like it might just be political smoke.
Yeah. Well, I mean, before this episode, I spoke to you and I said that I don't want to talk about test waiting times. So obviously we spent the first 10 minutes of this episode talking about it, but that was because of the DVSA's release date. So I think it's relevant, but I don't want to talk about it too much because I feel like it's been done to death. I feel like there's very little new we can say on the subject. And I do think it's worth coming back to at some point. And when there's new snippets, as in today, that comes in, I think it's relevant mentioning them, but I don't want to cover that ground too much. However, the NASP did recently release notes from their meeting with the DVSA, and I want to speak about them a little bit because there are a couple of things there that caught my eye. However, it's probably worth noting at this point that I've just used two acronyms that people listening may not necessarily know what they are. So, DVSA, Driving Vehicle Standards Agency, NASP, National Association Strategic Partnership.
Yeah.
Yep. And NASP is made up of the three biggest national associations, which now provides me with three more, which is the ADI and JC. Oh, please pull me if I get these wrong, Chris. Approved Driving Instructor National Joint Council.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. MSA Motor School Association.
Yep.
And DIA Driving Instructor Association.
Yes.
Right. So for anyone that doesn't know who NASP are, that's who NASP are. They're like the Justice League. They're like the mini superheroes doing their own thing, fighting the battles, and they come together to form the Justice League and then take on the big bad guy. I noticed that Justice League, not Avengers. Read into that what you will. So one of the things that stood out for me on the notes was a comment of panic buying is not over, but they're starting to see behavioural change in the way people book. Now, I'm curious how you can see behavioural change in the way people book, but it's something that the DVSA have been saying for quite a while, isn't it? They've been saying that it's the behaviour of people booking that they've struggled with. So, do you read anything into that, Chris, or is that lip service? Or
I think it's a settling down of public opinion on the driving test waiting list. I think there's less panic because people have given up. So they're accepting what they're being told rather than going, we've got a way around it. We can find a system. We'll find that test, fighting over it. They're just kind of going, oh, okay, this is where it is. And we've also got far enough into it that we're kind of used to that pattern. That's when they entered into things. It was how it is now. Whereas before they were coming into it off the back of the panic. So there was a different perception. Interestingly, I've noticed there's been a change in the theory test. In the theory test pass rates. I was having a look at those, and that sort of reflects. It's obviously a precursor to the practical tests. And there was a bit of an increase in pass rate that seemed to be the people that were renewing their tests that had expired because they couldn't get tests, and that it settled down again. So we're not having those repeat visitors to the theory, and that would also kind of show this settling down, that people aren't fighting over things quite so much. So yeah, I think there's a change in understanding. I think instructors are getting better at it as well. That we've either given up, or we found strategies. We're happy with where we're at, and you don't have to be in a good position to be, to make do. So I think making do is probably the difference in it. I'd be interested where they get that evidence from. Is it the survey that they put out there, which is us all making numbers up, and there's no science behind that? We just put our finger in the air and they go, yeah, well, that's fact. Or is it actually what they're seeing of users accessing the system? Because they can see when people are logging on and when. They can see those things that are happening. And just not mentioning waiting lists or test availability again, but I know locally, not having any availability, people are logging on now in the week rather than at the beginning of the week, because they're looking for what would be overtime that's being put on there, and they've sussed that out. The hearsay, word of mouth in the industry has always been stronger than the official stuff anyway. So the people are figuring it out, and that's spreading. So I think all of those factors kind of come together. I'd just be interested in which ones they are using, because they haven't quoted, sources and actual evidence.
I mean, the user survey, which roughly, was it 2.5% of ADIs complete? So, yeah. But it's interesting you mentioned the theory test there, because I had a student redo hers recently, and while she was going back through the apps, she came to me and said, "Why are there so many questions about trailers now?" I'm like, well, because you used to have to take a test, but now you just need to be able to answer 4 or 5 questions on a theory test, and you're fit to do it. And she's like, that don't make sense. And we had a big conversation around that. So, but maybe that's a conversation for another day or a previous day. But I think you're right. I think stuff is becoming the new norm. I just think it's becoming the new norm. Speaking of the new norm, I loved this quote as well from the notes, which was, NASP asked about the rewording for Part 2 and Part 3 candidates' results emails. This will need to be reviewed by the examiner team, most of whom are out testing full-time, which really made me chuckle. So the new norm, most of whom were out testing full-time, but now they're not, potentially, but some of them still are. Some of them have left. Some of them are retired. Who knows what's going on with that, Chris?
Yes, yeah, we're still waiting to hear. I think is that we're in a holding pattern on what the ADI examiners are actually doing. I know locally we've lost more than we've kept.
I think the biggest thing that caught my attention from these notes was the volume, the sheer volume of ADIs and applications and that side of it. And we're going to come into that in just a moment, but we may as well take a moment to set the table. So, Chris, do you want to tell people who you are and what you do?
I am Chris Bensted, and I am a specialist theory trainer nowadays, but also an audit trainer. And I run Theory Test Explained for all your theory test needs, and the DITC, the Driving Instructor and Trainers Collective, which is the signposting platform for the driving instructor industry for all the stuff that you need, or maybe haven't yet realized that you need. And when you know that you need it, you can get in touch.
Excellent. And you are listening to the Instructor Podcast Green Room Edition, and I am your host, Terry Cook, and I'm going to point you in the direction of both the Instructor Podcast newsletter and the Instructor Podcast WhatsApp channel. Go sign up or follow as you would do with the WhatsApp channel. You can find links in the show notes on the website, which is www.theinstructorpodcast.com. Over there, you'll get access to all kinds of amusing stuff, like different links in the WhatsApp channel, and then we'll update you on news and different podcasts that release and upcoming events and all stuff like that in the newsletter as well. So go and check both those out. But I want to return to what I was saying before we took a moment there, because I'm going to read out actually the full thing, so I hope this doesn't get too bland for a second. But the notes from the NASP are: volumes of new applications are not reducing. Over 100% more applications than previously. Now 41,000 on the register with 4,000 trainee license holders. Still receiving around 700 applications per month for trainee licenses. Previously 250 per month. This has been challenging with no let up for 18 months. February 2024, there were 1,675 new ADI qualifications and 722 trainee licenses. So this is going to increase greatly the demand on Part 3 tests, which we've spoken about before, and obviously have then an impact to the standards check. But again, we've spoken about that before, and I'm just intrigued to ask you, with this volume of driving instructors, and the volume of people on the trainee licenses, and the volume of applications where we're fast heading towards 50,000 ADIs, what impact could this have, or will this have potentially, on current ADIs who are just minding their business and doing a good job?
While there's a big enough market, it's not a problem. We can all fill our diaries to excess, and therefore they'll get spread out. The good ADIs will, in a way, benefit from potentially less good, weaker ADIs being out there, because they get to pick up the pieces. Isn't that how it's always been? I don't think there's any different. I think the problem at the moment is that qualification process. If I was coming into things, I think there's two potentially guilty parties. One is DVSA, who are saying you must take you may take 3 attempts at the part 2, 3 attempts at the part 3, which we can't deliver, but you've got they're on paper, you can have them, but you won't be able to fit them in, and we won't give you an extra badge. You'll get a second probably, but a third one, no, they're refusing them, generally speaking. It's all on a case-by-case basis, but the feedback we get is that. And then the training providers, and as a training provider myself, I think we have to be really careful what we're selling, because if we're selling the ability to get people 3 attempts if they need them, then you can't, and we potentially, as individual training providers, could come unstuck at the end of it. So that's where I think that the issue is. I think the rest of it is kind of what it's been for years. People come and go. I think potentially we're in a better position than we've been previously, because apparently coaching's a bigger thing than it used to be. I don't know if you've heard. But when we've had really nasty times before, we were in the instructor season of the driving instructor world. And with the move towards more of a coached approach, PDIs are coming in better qualified, or better aware, shall we say. But there's cons to that as well, because they haven't necessarily got the instructional skills. So, there is a change. I don't think it's really any different to the change that's always been there when things go up and down. It's always been an economy that follows the economy. That in recession times we tend to see people start being made redundant. People start worrying about money and jobs. They look at what skill set have I got? Oh, I've got a driving license. I'll become a driving instructor. Again, another thing we could change would be the qualification process. So as a group, as a collective, I don't think we're going to necessarily see issues. Some will come, some will go. As individuals, depends where you are on that curve. If you're someone that suffers because of it, now is the time to step up and look at your service that you're providing and your service that you are promoting, and make sure that you're doing a really good job, because the cream will always go to the top. And if there's an issue, identify that and do something about it. I find someone that you can use as a guide or a mentor, or can challenge you and look at those kind of things. Now's the time to put that legwork in, because I don't see it getting better, assuming this is worse. It's I think there's a lot going on, but we're going to turn up every day. We're going to work, and until they've sorted out that list that we don't talk about, there's a decent amount of work out there for people.
Wasn't it Red Driving School that used to advertise as driving instructors being recession proof?
Yes, or at least they kept the Red Driving School recession proof, because that people then signed up. It's that thing, isn't it? That actually there's the instructors who are governed by the badge, governed by the DVSA, and then there's driving schools that aren't. The instructors, individual instructors are, the schools aren't. They can't touch them. Do what you like as a driving school. It's not an invitation. But there's no oversight outside of standard business practice oversight, trading standards and stuff like that. But actually, by the DVSA, there's nothing. And then there's training providers, absolutely no governance over them at all, unless they choose to be audit, which is a voluntary scheme. So you just don't recognize their authority if you choose not to be. So, that is a strange industry to be in. And sadly, the providers will always benefit, and they're not always the good providers.
You mentioned audit there. I've just gone back to the notes from the NASP / DVSA meeting. Audit, currently no plan. Anyway, but do you know what? I think some of the things you mentioned there are some of the things that concern me. One of the things that stood out to me that you said was, now is the time to step up. And unfortunately, I've been saying this for a year, but now is the time to step up and look at what you're doing, because we are getting this bigger number of instructors, and it isn't slowing down. And looking at what has been put forward in those notes, I will just say I'll put a link to these meeting notes in the show notes. That's going to get confusing. But anyway, head to the show notes for this episode, or sign up to the Instructor Podcast email, and you'll receive the links in there as well, and you'll be able to get access to the notes for this meeting. But either way, it sounds like there is a continuing growth of applications. So it's not just that there is a large number coming through. The number of applications continue to grow. So the number of instructors is only going to get bigger and bigger, which means that are we potentially going to, be bigger than the demand for driving lessons? So it's something that we have to consider as instructors. And I think now really, really is the time to as you said, step up and look at what you're doing, not just on an in-car basis, which, yes, is massively important, but also the little things. So making sure that your car is clean, because if someone's got two instructors to choose from, and one of them's got a clean car and one of them's not, but everything else is the same, they'll use that as a selling point. The thing I've spoke about before is, don't be the but instructor. So your recommendation is, it was a really good instructor, but his car were dirty. Or was a really good instructor, but that hand sometimes accidentally knocked my knee, or whatever it is. Don't be a but instructor. So get on social media, start putting your stuff out there, whether it's one day a week you start off with, and don't just do the past pictures. I've spoken about this so much recently, and I don't know whether I'm phrasing it wrong or whether, people are a little bit stubborn, but I cannot stress enough that past pictures are a really good thing. They really are. They're the bread and butter. It's what the public know us as. They know us as driving instructors. We help people pass the test. But my big thing at the minute is that who you are as a driving instructor? Are you the driving instructor that helps people pass a test? Or are you the driving instructor that provides the honest truth, that provides theory test training, that provides support to people with additional needs, or that have, serious anxiety issues, or Are you someone that offers evening lessons, perhaps, or weekend lessons when other people don't because I need my weekend free or whatever it is? But if you're only posting past pictures, you're telling people I'm the person that will help you pass a test and that's it. So get some of that other stuff out there that you do as well. Make your social media look like the service you provide rather than the service that every driving instructor provides, because that is my concern. And the people that are listening to this episode, or, we're 30 minutes in here, the people that are halfway through this episode are the people that do care. Because the people that don't give a toss aren't going to still be listening now. Now we're talking about something serious rather than just waiting times, So I'm speaking of those people because a lot of those people won't be doing that stuff. They won't be building up their social media. They won't be keeping their car clean. Whatever it is, those little things, they won't necessarily be clicking. Now is the time to start implementing that. Are we right there, Chris? Is that what we need to be really focused on? The good instructors need to start focusing on that and showcasing what they do.
Yeah, because now's when we get lazy.
Yep.
So I remember, I think it was the Freakonomics podcast, but I might have got that wrong. But I think it was them that said, use the example of taxi drivers. That if you're a taxi driver and you go out and it's a rotten day, and it's raining, no one's really going anywhere, it's really quiet. What people tend to do is double down and work even longer than they were going to, and they try and get as much as they can on that bad day to cover their costs. If it's a really good day and they're really busy, they get to midday, go, well, I've made my money, I'm going to go home. They have the rest of the day off. And what they should do is do it the other way around. On a bad day, give up. Go and do something that's actually beneficial. Know when to cut your losses. And then on a good day, fill your boots. Go and make use of the fact it's really busy, because you don't know when the next busy time's going to be. And we're in one of those in a way that, it is really busy. So people are struggling to keep that momentum going. But what we need to do is be planning for those bad days, not just saying, oh, yeah, it's really busy. So we need to be making sure that those little bits of effort are going in, so we've got something there for when we do need to advertise, so that we stand out for when we do need to stand out. And also for when standards checks come back in, we're still delivering the same quality and structure and everything else that we need to, so we haven't got to worry about that extra burden, which we know isn't at the moment. So everyone goes, well, we won't worry. We won't worry for a while. So just all of those kind of things. Now's absolutely the time to just carve out a bit of time to find an opportunity to put little steps in place. Don't have to be big things. Even if you were looking at a summary of each day, these are the top 3 highlights of my day or of my week, and you put that out as a social post. Canva, so easy to do. Everyone can make it look good on Canva, and whack that out just as a kind of standing post. Yeah, lovely. It's not brilliant. It's not massively engaging, but it will show what you do. And then that will help. So, yeah, no, I totally agree. I think now, it's always the time to make your business better. That's never a bad thing.
I think that is brilliant. You said it's not brilliant doing that 3 highlights of my day thing. I think it is. Those are the things I think that make instructors stand out, that make the 16-year-old that is interested in learning to drive and is starting to look at driving instructors go, I'm going to follow that account because that guy just posts past pictures. I don't need an instructor yet. Or the parent of the 16-year-old, if you're talking Facebook, that is like, my son's going to start having lessons next year, and so I'm going to look for instructors now. And because there are some good parents out there that do this stuff, they don't all just text you on their birthday and say, can I have a lesson tomorrow? And yes, that has happened. It does, but they're not all like that. I've had inquiries this week from people that are the kids sort of, I think they're 17 in August. I've had two from different people. The kids 17 in August. I'm like, this is what we want. And it's because they've seen, well, for me, it was because they both seen my podcast and they've got their kid listening to the 5 Minute Theory now. I'm not suggesting everyone goes and releases a podcast, but there's stuff you can do that can attract that attention. And my big thing around that as well is, how good do you think those, or how heavily do you think those parents are invested in their kids' safety as a driver if they're looking 3 or 4 months in advance, and if they're finding someone because of the 5 Minute Theory podcast? Well, that's a kid I want to teach, because that kid's going to be coming in very probably, or more likely, with their head screwed on right, rather than getting the random person that sees a pass picture and goes, oh yeah, probably best look at my son starting driving. I'll send him a message asking how much his prices are. And I think that's the thing. And look, this isn't a whole look at how I do it, I'm awesome thing, because my social media or my driving school, I've said this for a while now, hasn't been up to par recently. But the messages I get from people inquiring are generally really great messages. They're like, I'm sure you're busy, but can I ask you about this? Can I ask you about this? But yet when I speak to other instructors, they all seem to say, oh, well, I'll just get a message saying, how much do you cost? And I think that's what we're putting out there, because we attract what we put out. So I really do implore anyone to start putting that stuff out there. And not just that, but as I say, have a look at what we're doing on lessons as well. Have a look at what we're doing in car. So I mentioned before, The Honest Truth, we had them on the Instructor podcast recently. It's a great resource. Even if you buy The Honest Truth and you have to pay full whack for it, £7.50 a month. That's not a massive outlay. Sorry, not outlay. Actually, it is an outlay considering how much a lot of stuff costs. But that's the full price. That's the most you will pay. There are some companies, and I'm hoping to get this with the Instructor Podcast Premium, which I probably shouldn't say until I've got it, but either way, that can get a discount on that. There are some areas that are funded. So if you go onto the Honest Truth website and search on there, you might be in a funded area, so you actually get it for free. Now, again, what an amazing resource to offer your students, and what an amazing thing to shout about on social media. So here's the question for you, Chris. What else can we be doing on lessons, apart from teaching people to drive? Maybe we'll come back to that a bit in a minute, but what else can we be bringing to lessons that showcases us? What else can we bring in that's a bit more unique, if you like?
One of the things that I used to have, and it's slightly outdated now, but there's modern alternatives, was TomTom had a thing called a Curfer, which were plugged in your OBD port, and it recorded your journey, and it showed you where you've been, and it gave you stats about your drive. It was some really good stuff about it, some that was, I'm not into cars, so I was never that bothered. But what was really good was being able to screenshot that and go, this is where we've just driven on this lesson. Guess what? It wasn't test routes. It wasn't what I used it for. I didn't use it for recording those. I used it for just a nice drive, and they went, yeah, we've just done that, and that stood out. And I used to just make sure I stuck my brand on there, so that when my pupil showed it to their friends, to other people, it said it was with us. And I found that was really useful. And I know, that there's alternatives to that to kind of track routes and things. So just being able to show that if you're someone who does go here, there, and everywhere on lessons, you can prove that. You can get some evidence for it. I think that works really well. And then the one that I always, end up talking to people about is, what do you do once you've finished your syllabus? So we look at kind of the test focused syllabus, because it's the stuff you need to do to be able to drive a car wherever. Once we finish talking about specific types of junction, or we've finished talking about maneuvers, and once we've done all of those things, what do you then do that is structured and beneficial afterwards? Because that's the fun stuff in my book. One of my favorites is being an Amazon delivery driver. Other companies are available. Give them a list of a few addresses and say, you've got to find those houses, and you've got to pull up somewhere where you could to deliver a package. If you knew the people that lived there, it'd be awesome. You could have people knocking on the door all day long, but you don't have to go that far. But the ability of finding a house in a road is a challenge. And we all know that as instructors. You can also then introduce them to things like what 3 words, which are better ways to find your location. Because if we're not distracted trying to look for somewhere, we know where we're going. That because we planned better, that hasn't just got to be in the car. That's a useful skill in itself. And it's an extension of the one that I was when I first came into being an instructor. Apparently, no other instructors taught you to refuel, because the number of times that it came up as being, well, yeah, my other instructor never did that, or people we'd be refueling, and there were 2 types. There was the one that said it would come over and go, "Oh, I wish my instructor had taught me how to do this," or the other ones that go, "He's wasting your time," and my pupils would turn around and tell him where to stick it. So it's having that, including them in the journey, but making it fun. So look for the skills that are useful in life, not in driving. The once you've done your driving bit and you're then doing your day to day, and then figure out how can you make a lesson out of it that can be a bit of fun. Scavenger hunts work well. I like them as well. At one point I even had a local crossword, which was just lists of places, and we had to go to the location using the sat nav, and then they'd have to try and answer the local trivia question. Why? Because I get bored. Because I don't want to be driving around without a purpose. I want to do something. And sometimes I think you don't know what their need is, so let's start driving. Well, at least it gave it a purpose. And we all enjoyed it a bit more. I was happier and I was less tired at the end of things. So, it just needs something. And what we know is the longer that they're driving, having lessons for, the more experience they get, the safer they are. So if we can justify more lessons, not from an economic perspective, because we've got a queue a mile long waiting for lessons, just from a safety perspective, if we can justify some more lessons, they're more likely to pass their test, and they're more likely to then be safer after their test. That's a win.
I love it. Some great stuff there. I'm going to bring in a comment that Gary Thomas has just thrown up, actually, because quite like this one. A next lesson with an Everton fan I teach is McDonald's drive-through. He's paying. Petrol station, I'm paying. And then Goodison Park for an Everton shirt. But I love that, because that's what they're going to do when they pass the test. They'll go to McDonald's, they'll go to Goodison Park. I love that aspect of it. I had a brilliant one the other day. It was an idea from a student. It's someone that's failed the test a few years ago. Now they've come to me and they said, can we drive around? They haven't got a test booked yet. They said, can we drive around all the test centres? Because where I live, I've got like a little cluster of centres around me. So for anyone that knows the area, Skipton, Steeton, Thornbury, Hare Hills, Horsforth. That's like the circle I use, although I try and avoid Hare Hills, because those that know Hare Hills will know why I've just said I try and avoid it. And I'm like, yeah, let's do that. Now, from an instructor point of view, I didn't handle the best way possible, because I just got very excited at the idea and said, let's do it. Didn't put a goal to it at all, as in, what can we learn? It was just, yeah, let's do that. That sounds fun. But we had a great time. We learned loads of stuff as we were driving. She saw some, we improved as we went round, but it was great. And then we kind of finished up at Horsforth. She's like, yeah, this is where I'm going to do my test. All those of us like, well, I'm like, okay, cool. But it's like, I enjoyed that. She enjoyed that. And I'm like, I think I might see if I can bring this to all my lessons, because it covered every aspect, almost every aspect of driving you could consider. And I just think, it's sort of a slightly different concept. And, it's like you said, I get bored. And my stuff tends to be off the cuff, because I think we were speaking about this the other day, Chris, that if part of the reason why I never film my lessons and put anything like that on social media is because I'm different with every single student. I adapt massively. I don't like that with people generally. The way I am with you, Chris, I'll be different to someone else. It's just, that's who I am. I'm like a bit of a chameleon like that. And so I think that if I was a certain way with one student and then another student saw that, I'd be like, well, how come we don't do that with me? But there's needs for each one. And I tend to be a bit off the cuff like that. So when a student says, let's go drive around every test center, I'm like, Awesome. That sounds like fun. But yeah, I think drive-throughs are great. I think multi-story car parks are great. Motorway driving, what a perfect opportunity. And one of the things I've started doing over the last 6 months, so I'm really just starting to see this come into fruition now, is on those early lessons, I'm asking students, how will you know when you're an independent driver? And well, admittedly, I try and steer this a little bit, so it's not coaching, I steer it a little bit, and I'm like, if you could, where's somewhere you would want to drive to? And I get stuff like Manchester or Scarborough or whatever. I said, okay, well, how about we drive there? If you can drive to Manchester and back with me just sat there as a passenger, then you can drive. And they connect them dots really well. And look, obviously not going to drive to Manchester on every lesson, but if they can do that, as you said before, how easy is a test? It's what I talk about with motorway lessons. If you can go and do a 2-3 hours on the M62 or whatever motorways local, and I appreciate this isn't doable for everyone, but do the motorway for 2 or 3 hours, and then on a driving test, you'll get onto a dual carriageway for 4 minutes. Well, I'm not being funny, but that's a piece of piss. So it's setting those higher standards, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right, though, that some areas can't do certain things, but that's where you earn your money, because you figure out a way you can. And sometimes you've got to be clever about it. My aim, I'm very anti-test route. Or, sorry, not test route, test area. Because most instructors go, I don't teach test routes, but they go, but I'll go to the key areas in that test area to cover them. I don't think we should, unless there is no way you can get someone to that standard in another way. And I think that, that's where the skill comes in, of going, all right, so that's the skills that they need. How can I put them in somewhere else? Even if, all right, you might end up going there to test whether you got it right or not, rather than wait till D-Day. But try and get that training level done elsewhere and try and make sure that that's covered. And in an ideal world, I wouldn't go there at all. So if we're then looking outside of test stuff, still try and say, find out what you haven't got and try and compensate for it. Some people have said I've been trying to do that for a long time. So, it is looking for that. So I can hear my other half laughing in my ear, and she's not even here. But it is find out what is missing and see what could you do to try and bring that in some other way, because that's where the magic will happen. Because once you're outside of that box, it gets fun.
I must admit, I, for a long, long time, used to specifically teach test areas, the key areas. And I wouldn't go so far as say it's wrong. But what I don't do it now. I have a slightly different approach now. I do ask the students. So I use my most local test centre, which is Horsforth, because it doesn't have a car park. You set off on the main road. And I ask them, would you like to practice just setting off from that main road? Would it make you feel more confident on the day if you've done that before? And some of them say yes, some of them don't care. And I think that by asking them, that helps. And I think the other thing is, some of those key areas, they're not key areas because they're test key areas. They're key areas because they're problem areas. So we should be practicing them, not because they're on a test, but because this is bloody hard. Let's go and do it and learn how to do this awkward thing where, all right, this isn't actually on a test route by me, but there is a specific road. I try and take everyone because you come to the lights and the bike box is that faded you can barely see it. So I try and take everyone there because it's like spot the bike box, because it's a great thing to do. And then, if they pull an insert bike box, I'm like, can you have a look where you parked? And then they say, oh, crap. And it's a really good kind of learning point. So we can take them to those key areas, but it shouldn't be because it's in a test area. It should be key areas where they can learn. I think that's the thing for me. I've got a question here from Gary, a couple of questions from Gary, and I think they're relevant. Should a PDI be able to use motorways with students? So I mentioned motorway driving there. Should PDIs be able to use motorways? I'm undecided on this. Chris, what say you?
So I was involved in motorway stuff when the decisions were being made to some extent. So I've had the pleasure of sitting in some rooms with the people who made those decisions. National Highways England, as was, and it's interesting. I think it was just they couldn't defend themselves. If we're qualified, we've passed the test. Therefore, if something goes wrong, it's our fault. If you're not yet qualified and they've let you do it, then they're potentially liable as part of the process, DVSA or whoever. So it was a compromise. It was my feeling. Nothing official in that, just the way that people have spoken about it. It seems to be that there's that there. None of us have had, as ADIs, have had training on motorways as standard. You might have gone and got some.
Or roundabouts.
Or roundabout, exactly. But they let us on them. PDIs can, just to clarify, PDIs can teach roundabout. Just don't do it on a standards check or part 3. So sorry, just everyone seems to want to do roundabouts. So yeah, it is, again, we might have had training on roundabouts depending on your trainer, but it was never part of the testing, and we focus on testing. So with regards to motorways, that was, I think the big thing was it looked good on paper. It looked like they'd done, they ticked the boxes and they'd done the right thing. I've had a lot of parents or accompanying drivers, not necessarily just parents, who once I've had the conversation with someone, they've gone, well, you mean I can't go on a motorway? We've got a lot of motorway locally. We've got the M25 next to us, so it's fairly accessible. And a lot of them have ticked that box, not realizing that it wasn't acceptable to do so. As far as I'm aware, there hasn't been a serious incident, touch wood, and I hope it stays that way, involving a learner on motorways, because we know that they're pretty safe roads, and if they're being accompanied and we're going into it aware of the danger because we're being driven by someone who can't drive, generally people take suitable action. There's 2 lots of eyes looking, probably more so than there are on non-motorway roads, when people get complacent and go to sleep or read the paper if they're accompanying a learner driver, which we know they shouldn't do, or sit on their phone, or so yeah, I think it was just for that was the reason. Do I think PDIs should be allowed? No. I think firstly, it also depends what you mean as PDI. One of these important things to define. If someone has just come on, if they're teaching for free, so they're on the register, the DVSA view them as a PDI. It's not a pink badge holder, pink license holder. It's someone who's on the register. So always important to just define where that is. But I think even someone who has had the 40 hours of training, is on a pink badge, has had their 20 hours following that, that as to all intents and purposes, they got one test to take. They haven't passed that test yet. And I've been out with some doing recovery training. I wouldn't want them teaching any of my kids, just, yeah. So I think we've got that test for a reason, the part 3 test. It's probably a safer option, because if it goes wrong on a motorway, it goes wrong quickly. In other situations, people can get out your way. Often on motorways, I don't think I'd be brave enough to say otherwise.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? If you have a collision on a 30 road, there's high chance you'll survive. If you have a collision on a motorway, that's a whole different ball game. I am just going to mention here, there was a recent documentary, maybe that's the wrong word, Panorama, who do the documentaries. They did one on smart motorways, which I haven't watched yet. But the National Highways responded to that quite aggressively yesterday, shall we say. I'll put a post up in the Instructor podcast WhatsApp channel so people can go and check that out. But basically, Panorama was talking about smart motorways and all the negatives around it, and National Highways came back and said, actually, these facts you've put forward are wrong or out of context and so on. So interesting read and possibly an interesting watch. So go and check that out. But I want to bring it back to driving lessons because I've got a question I want to cover, but I also want to mention one last thing, unless you've got anything to chip in with, Chris, just about what we can do and what we should be doing. And the big thing I want to get across is communication, because communicating with your learners. So even on day, even before they start having lessons, you can be talking about a waiting list if you want to, as in you will potentially be waiting a while for your test. So it's great that you're starting now. However you want to phrase it, you can make them aware. Not scaremongering. No, you're not aiming to scare them. You're aiming to keep them informed. But also the communication around lessons, the communication around the theory, the communication. Like I said with my student that came to me and said, bloody hell, there's a lot of trailer. I'm like, you're right. I hadn't made her aware of that. That's poor communication on my part. I knew she was retaking a theory. I could have made her aware from that. I've learned from that. So if I have a student now that's taken a theory previously, I will be making them aware of that. So that I think it's important also to showcase resources. And I'm not saying this for anyone to showcase mine, but not just your own, to showcase the stuff that they can use. It doesn't have to be yours. You don't have to be the person. Let's use the example that we've got on the screen. You don't have to be the person doing the theory stuff, whether it's theory test explained one-on-one training, or whether it's a 5-minute theory podcast that you can dip into. You don't have to be the person doing that, but you can be the person sharing that. Your learner will appreciate that just as much. It's not taking anything away from you. If you don't like me and Chris, then by all means don't share it. But it's like in that example, what you're doing is you're making yourself look good to your learner. And I'm just using the theory example because we're both here. So getting that communication right, communicating about early on, look, the car is mine. I will be completely honest. If you aren't fit to drive, you won't be using my car. I will have the conversation with you, discussing whether you're fit to drive, whether you're good enough, or all that kind of stuff. But the car is mine. Let them know that from day one. There's no harm in that. But I think that communication is key for this whole process around lessons, around the waiting times, around the theory test changes, problems that we have with it. I think communication is key. Do you agree, Chris?
Yes.
I'm glad, because if you didn't, I'd be slightly disappointed.
I was tempted to go, sorry, did you say something? I wasn't listening, because communication works both ways. And I think that's really important. For me, it's the most important element in life, because I think if you have communication taken away from you, the ability to communicate, that's when problems happen. I think most of the problems we face are down to communication issues. So I think it's incredibly important. And when it's something that is as important as your business, your livelihood, when it's all gone wrong and it's all fallen apart, it's too late to fix it. So communicate well and you won't have those problems. And you don't have to do that as a unique thing every time. You could just have those resources available and point people in the direction of it. I'm awful at that. I work harder every time instead of smarter, because I send the response about the same thing to the individual rather than copy and paste something. And it's something I'm working on. I'm trying to develop more fixed resources. So yeah, you can have that already written out, and you can then copy and paste what you did before. And if it's a problem for one person, guaranteed it's a problem for someone else. So start just little things, put together those resources, and then you can use them going forwards. But it is, about us knowing where we stand. We're much better when we know where we stand. Remember the bill payers, the parents, whoever they might be, because so often we'll get focused on our pupil and we'll forget that actually that communication benefits everybody. Yeah, we've said before, inviting people in on lessons and saying, well, yeah, come along and see how I'm teaching, because you're going to go out and support the learner in their practice. Be on the same page. And having good communication means you can disagree on good terms, which we've managed to do a couple of times, and we're still friends. Well, I think we are. You haven't said otherwise, and if you need to, you should say so. But it's you haven't got a choice. It's fine. I'm just turning up every time. It's all good. But it gives you more flexibility, and it allows you to drop the ball. if you communicate well. I can't fit you in my diary because I'm absolutely fully booked, but I will get back in touch with you on this date and give you an update, even if the update is it hasn't changed. Silence in driving instructing can be a really good thing, but silence in business rarely is. So keep the communication open on all fronts. And then it goes back to what you were saying about social media. Sorry, I just jumped into my head. So it goes back to what you were saying about social media. While we're busy and everything's good, keep that social media communication open for exactly the same reason as everything else.
I had Laura Morris on the episode of the Standards Checklist, which is a premium episode I do, and she made that point about silence and how learners interpret that silence on a lesson. And it's something that I was doing subconsciously. And ever since, I'm like, oh, this is silence is part of communication. And it really resonated for me. But yeah, one top tip, actually, if you're copying and pasting stuff, like one message from one student to another, just remember to change the name, because don't always go down well if you send the wrong one. I'm actually going to give a specific example here. Back to when I had a lot of back issues. If I could feel my back was playing up or starting to play up, I used to message all my students that week and say, my back is giving me some grief. At the minute, I can do lessons, but there's a chance I might cancel on the day this week. If you would rather just cancel your lesson so that you know you're not going to get messed about, feel free. I won't take offense at that. But please be aware there is a chance I will cancel on the day. No one ever complained about that when I sent that message. If anything, I just got some nice sympathetic replies, which made me want to do it more. But it's, like you said, it's two-way. It is two-way. And I think we need to encourage that honest and open communication. And look, I realize just saying talk to me doesn't always work, but it's something I always do on my first lesson. And again, since I say to them, you can message me literally anytime you want. I don't care if you message me in 3 in the morning. I won't reply at 3 in the morning. Just don't take offense when I reply at 6:30, because someone did message me at that early. And then when I replied, they said, what do you think you're doing messaging me at 6:30 in the morning? I'm like, you sent me a message at 2. Anyway, so, and I think because of that, people do communicate. They do, and I just think it works well. And I think that's what we need. And I think you put it probably better than I have there, Chris. But yeah, just make a communication good. But I want to come over to a question I received. It wasn't for this episode. Actually, it was for this episode, but they didn't know we were going to be talking about what we're talking about. So it was a good guess of the question. And I've got a whole myriad of answers for this. So I'm going to let you come to it first, Chris, and I'll fill in the bits that you don't, which you may fill them all in. But either way, how do you encourage 2-hour slots with students? A bunch of mine have dropped to 1 hour, and it leaves little time for those grow/smart conversations and reflections. I'm going to let you know one piece of information before you answer this, because it may change the response to the question. That was asked by a PDI. So I'm going to repeat that question again. How do you encourage 2-hour slots with students? A bunch of mine have dropped to 1 hour, and it leaves little time for those grow/smart conversations and reflections.
That's really interesting. And I appreciate the PDI information, because I think that makes it even more interesting. So my first response was both sides. Why do they want to drop to an hour? And why do you want to do 2 hours? One of my quick answers to it is an hour and a half works really well as well. So if you're looking for compromise, good communication. It might be that you find that with some people, if they've got really good reasons for an hour, look at an hour and a half and you get a bit of the best of both. However, I don't think a good reason for doing a 2-hour lesson is necessarily to fit in those conversations, the coaching conversations. That's not the point. The point is, it's better for business, it's more profitable, it's more practical. The pupil will learn more and better. Unless they can't manage 2 hours, then compromise. If there's an issue of I've just done it actually on one of my theory sessions. We did half an hour because we got to half an hour and he was nearly asleep. And that's because he's just come back from Japan before anyone points fingers at me being boring. Thank you very much. But he was knackered, and it was his first session back after a long break. And I went, we've done a lot of good stuff in half an hour. Let's call it. Now, you can't run a business like that. You can't always be cutting off, the profit, because that's the problem, isn't it? All of the extra stuff, actually, your cost is front loaded, except for fuel, but even then, that you're cutting off profit every time. So you are cutting yourself, not, in accommodating them. And all these things are lovely to do. And I will always do as much as I can for the individual, but we're not looking at individuals. We are looking at the big picture of running a business and delivering quality driving lessons and giving them the service as part of being a good business. So I think that, it's looking at why there is an opposite view as a PDI, because the part 3 is 40 minutes. It's an hour if you include the goal setting and the risk management, to use DVSA terms, not mine. So if you look at that as an hour window, I always tell people they should do 10-minute units and put those together, chunk the lesson into 10-minute units, and then use those, because you can then, like Lego, build whatever size lesson you need to. So I would question what you're, as a PDI, if you're doing hour lessons and struggling, we need to change the way you do hour lessons, because hour lessons can be valuable. If you're wanting 2-hour lessons for a different reason, whose reason is it? They can all be valid, but whose reason is it and what is the reason? And then if your pupil is looking for hour lessons for a reason, is it because your lessons are boring? That they can't cope with 2 hours? Is it that you're trying to fit too much in? Is it that you're not getting the mix right, so they're pulling away from it? Or is it that they've got no money, or they've got no time, or that they're finding they're worn out? There's so many variables. Good communication will get you through them. Talk to your pupils about why, and contact me via the DITC and we'll have a chat, because I'm happy to have that conversation with a PDI about ways that we can change things. Always, because if we get it right now, you're going to be one of those awesome instructors that isn't having a problem in the future.
I will just mention the person that asked this question is going to be an awesome instructor, 100%. But I had exactly the same response to this question as you did, and that's an interesting question. I love that question, in particular from it being a PDI. And you've really kind of said a lot of what I was thinking, in particular the aspect of part 3s and standards check as well. So if ADI is listening, 40 minutes. And look, my personal thing is, if I got called up for a standard check, which I'm due one, as is pretty much the entire industry, I would immediately make some of my lessons 1 hour, because all my lessons are, well, almost all my lessons are 90 minutes, 2 hours, 3 hours. I would want to get into the habit of doing 1 hour lessons. So as a PDI, I would almost be biting my hand off a little bit of those students, as well as you've said, finding out why, the communication aspect again. But it's like, great, I get to use this to practice now. This is, I really get to dive in. But I think the other thing I wanted to mention here was, and you did kind of touch on this, Chris, but I want to expand it a little bit. It said about not having the time to get the conversation around grow and smart. Well, maybe you don't have the time to get the driving in because you're doing more conversations. You're not dropping anything. You're just doing less of it on that lesson. So if, let's say, student A takes 40 hours, well, if they have 1 hour lessons, in theory, they'll take 40 1-hour lessons. If they have 2 hour lessons, in theory, they'll take 22 hour lessons. Now, I appreciate there's nuances there, but in theory, that's what would work. So you're not going to have less of those conversations. You're not going to have less of that driving overall. You'll just have less of bits of it on one lesson. And there may be lessons where you're packed up for 40 minutes of it. There may be lessons where you're packed up for 4 minutes of it. And I don't think it makes a difference over the series of an entire collection of lessons. I think that if you did every lesson like that, then maybe that's not necessarily ideal. But it's that up and down, I think, that makes a good collection of lessons, in that you will get some students that come to you on days and they're knackered and they don't want to do much. And so you go, okay, how about we go to the car park and we'll look at some bay parking today. And then you'll get lessons where students come to you and they're full of energy and they want to do longer or whatever. And it's that up and down that I think, as I say, I'm repeating myself, it makes those good lessons. And I also just wanted to touch on the business aspect, which you mentioned again. And I'm going to be a little bit more blunt with this one than you were. Just tell them no. Yeah. If you need to do 2 hours, and I think, again, this is probably a bit more aimed at ADIs and PDIs, because, again, PDIs should be looking less at the financial reasons. But if you cannot accommodate a 1 hour lesson, then just tell them you cannot accommodate a 1 hour lesson. You could offer them a 90-minute one, potentially, if that works, or offer them a different day. You know, I know what I've done in the past is if I can just move the lesson so they're the last lesson of the day, well, it's sometimes a nice little way to finish the day off. A 1 hour lesson when you've done two hours that day can feel like a little treat. It's like you start it, and every time you finish, it feels like 10 minutes and you're finished. So I just think that creating a good mixture of stuff there works well. Not being afraid to have the conversation with a student, finding out why, as you said, Chris, using it as a tool for your part 3 or for your standards check, using it as a little treat for you for an early finish, and sometimes just saying, look, I can't do it every time, but when I can reduce it to an hour, I will. I found that students quite like that. And also then, it's like, oh, I'm tired today. Let's do an hour. You know, and so I think it works both ways, but I really like that question. And I think that, yeah, I think we're on a very similar wavelength there, as we often are, even though we occasionally disagree, Chris. And coming back to your earlier point, yes, we are friends. We are friends. At least until I stop recording the podcast.
That's right. On screen. It's all good.
On screen, yeah. Anything else you want to touch on today? Anything we missed or anything else you want to cover, do you think, just either around driving lessons, the waiting times, the volume of driving instructors?
No, I think we're not out of the woods yet. I think the picture's changing, but I don't think it's necessarily getting more positive. It's getting different. Don't become complacent is what I keep saying to people. And that's about your own mental and physical well-being. That's what I will drop in. ADI walkback is still happening and is getting bigger and growing, and I love that. I'm getting such positive feedback from people. So, you know, look after yourself as well as your business and your pupils. But for me, that's probably more important, because you can always fix problems. You can't fix you when you're broke. Sometimes, you deal with that first. So, yeah, just that aside, no, everything's awesome. But look after yourselves.
Well, that's a good point for me to tie in this, because the ADI walk back in May, I am heading down and doing the ADI walk back with Sophie Lydon. We're going to do that, and we're doing it as part of RoadPeace Challenge, because the RoadPeace Challenge is 19th to 24th or 25th. It's around that time. It's the week of the ADI walkback. And Les Hopkinson, who is getting mentioned far too often on the show for my liking, but he came to me and suggested that we try and encourage ADIs to actively participate in the RoadPeace Challenge. So Les Hopkinson has got a Just Giving page up, and we're encouraging ADIs to walk 5 miles a day throughout the RoadPeace Challenge. Again, I will include links to these in the show notes, and if you're part of the Instructor podcast email, you'll get them there as well if you don't want to go and search for the show notes. But I really encourage ADIs to do it. You can walk 5 miles a day. You can use this link to raise funds. We would love it if we all use the same link to see how much we can raise collectively. However, you do not have to do that. You can go and do it by yourself. I would rather you did something than avoid it altogether, because you didn't want to be part of what we were doing. But it's an opportunity to raise funds and awareness for RoadPeace. And let's set the challenge of getting 51 ADIs on board. And the reason it said 51 ADIs is because if 51 ADIs did 5 miles a day, we would hit the target ourselves that RoadPeace have set, which is 1,766 miles, because that's how many people died on UK roads in 2022. And I think so far I've got about 6 people. So, and I just think it's a great opportunity to showcase that we do support things other than just getting people through a test, that we do support things other than just, I'm going to deliver safe driving lessons for life, but once you get out of my car, that's it. I want nothing else to do with you. We've actually got an opportunity to go and get involved and kind of just say, look, we care and we contribute. and we do more than what as past picture says. And I think that's a great opportunity. So yes, you will find links to this in show notes. There'll be emails coming out. But you can also just head to the RoadPeace website and take up the challenge yourself. You get a free t-shirt. What more could you want? Free RoadPeace t-shirt. What more could you want, Chris?
Oh, nothing. It would take the place of lots of those Terry Cook t-shirts that I keep seeing out there. So yeah.
That makes my day. So much makes my day. The only thing I wanted to mention, actually, just on the whole volume of ADIs thing, because we kind of touched on this before. Just be careful of people after a quick buck. I think that's the thing. You mentioned some of the trading companies that are out there, and not all of them are. I'm trying to use my words carefully and struggling. Not all of them are as good as the others, shall we say. So by all means, try stuff. By all means, dip in. You know, the Instructor Podcast Premium is 10 quid a month for the low tier. The worst you're going to do is spend a tenner, and there's a free trial on that. Or whether you sign up to Inspire Instructor Training or Client-Centered Learning or the other ones that I've forgotten that people will be shouting at me for right now. Whatever, you know, there's stuff out there, but don't be afraid to go and try stuff. But watch out for people that are after a quick buck, because when you can make a quick buck, people will try.
The thing I always point out is the longer the contract, the more chance it's not that good, because you've got to be tied into it to stay. You know, it's something we highlight as a driving school. We don't have a contract, length of contract, a cancellation policy with our instructors. If they don't want to be with us, then they leave. The difficulty with this industry is tying people into expensive things like cars. Cars make it difficult, so we end up having big costs that we have to cover. So that's not saying all contracts are bad, but the longer the contract, you know, the more that they know they've got to tie you in. Question it. That's all. Ask the questions.
I think really good point, you know, and I'm going to make one more plug for what I do. You know, there's a reason why I give people a 3 weeks trial for the Instructor Podcast, so they can come and check it out and see if it's right for them. I do not want people signing up for what I do and then leaving straight away because it's not for them. I want them to come and see that there's some really good stuff here. And I think the stats are currently, I think it's 98% of people that sign up for a free trial stay signed up. And I think that it's 92% of people that sign up stay signed up for over a year. And that's not that they leave after a year. It's just that they haven't cancelled yet after a year. So, you know, and I think that their stats you want to notice. It's that look for the people that are giving you stuff. This is a really good sort of interesting thing to finish off. Look at the people that are giving you stuff. Look at what Chris is doing right now. Look at what Chris does every month or almost every month on the Green Room. Look at the stuff Chris does on other podcasts and other events like the what do you call it? The ADI, NJC, and Intelligent Instructor Convention that I was going to mention that I forgot to mention. Need to plug that. Remind me before we go. All the appearances you make that you do for free. You know, the people that are giving you stuff for free are generally going to provide you with the best reliable content. It's the people that put a paywall behind everything, in my experience, as you kind of said, especially the longer ones. They're the ones that I'm not saying don't go to. I'm not saying all of them are bad, but there's a reason why they don't want to show you the stuff often. It's because the stuff isn't always very good. Whereas if you can go and see the stuff, i.e. the Instructor Podcast with over 180 episodes now, you can go and see, oh, I like this, I want more, or oh, I dislike this, I don't want it. And I think that's the way to go. But yes, did just want to mention the Intelligent Instructor and ADI NJC convention. It is the convention, I've got that right now, that's going on in May. I spoke to Richard Stars this week, and they basically only got a handful of tickets left. And I know he wasn't, I probably shouldn't say this, I know he wasn't expecting to sell out, so he's proper chuffed that they're pretty much selling out. So if you haven't bought a ticket yet, you won't have long left to get one. I'm going, was debating it for a long time until I saw some of the speakers, the likes of, I'll say it properly, Dr. Elizabeth Box, and some of the people there that I hadn't seen before. And it's like a fresh approach. And the thing that really did swing me is Rachel Butler said, if you come, I will rearrange the seating so you can sit next to me. I'm like, all right. That's done it. So there you go. But yeah, if there's a few seats left, so definitely go and check that out. I think it's good that we've got something different going on rather than a second expo. I wish that pick a name and stick to it because I get confused with conferences and conventions and expos. But yeah, I did want to mention that at the end. Any thoughts on that, Chris?
No, I'm looking forward to being there and speaking, and I'm glad that you were going because of me. Thank you.
No, it's how good is it that we're selling them out though?
It is awesome. It is, I think it shows, like we said earlier, people are willing to take time out for their business, for themselves. Some of us, it's about seeing other instructors and having those conversations. Some of it's about finding new resources, all of those different things. It's great, and massive respect to the people that put it on, because it's a lot of bloody hard work. So whatever reasons you have behind the promotions, or the people that are there and everything else, they're still turning up. They don't have to support the industry. They could just sit back and try and do it the easy way, because a lot of the time you don't make profit from turning up at events. What you're doing is supporting things, and it's something that I always used to really value, were the people that would turn up every time and they would say to you, no, we don't make profit from it, but we want to support instructors. We want to be part of the solution. So always respect that, and always want to try and support it where we can. Make the effort, give it a go. If you haven't been before, it's definitely worth a visit.
So on that note, do you want to just remind everyone where they can find you, Chris?
So the best place to find me is the DITC.co.uk. You can get hold of me through there, or Theory Test Explained. Facebook is the natural home for both of those, to be honest. So check us out on there, or just look me up. It's all good. You can find me on Google.
And whilst you're looking at websites, head over to www.theinstructorpodcast.com. Over there, you can find all of our previous episodes. You can find links to Apple, YouTube, Spotify. So you can go and find the stuff directly. You'll find links quite prominently to the WhatsApp channel that I mentioned to sign up to the email. You find the blogs with all the links and show notes in, as well as more details on how you can sign up to Instructor Podcast Premium for the £10 tier and the £22 tier, and all the joy and goodness that will bring to your life. So yes, big thank you to listening today, and a big thank you for you for joining me, Chris. As always, been a delight.
Always a pleasure.